Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredibly complex and honestly fascinating intersection of global trade, intellectual property, and access to life-saving medicine. Our guide for this journey is the recently enacted India-UK Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which you'll often hear referred to as CETA. Now, when giant economies negotiate free trade, the ripple effects go way beyond basic import and export numbers. These decisions can literally impact what medicines are available at your local pharmacy and exactly how much you're going to pay for them.
To really understand the stakes here, you have to look at the money on the table, $120 billion. That massive figure represents the 2030 bilateral trade goal between India and the UK set by this new agreement. They're aiming to double the current $60 billion mark by the end of the decade. And to pull off that kind of macroeconomic ambition, well, it requires major concessions and strategic alignments across almost every industrial sector, but especially in pharmaceuticals.
To navigate all this, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the India-UK trade deal, then look at the boom for drug makers, followed by why patient groups are so worried. After that, we'll explain the licensing battle and wrap things up by looking at how they're balancing health and wealth. All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the India-UK trade deal, or CETA. You know, it took 4 years of intense, highly contentious negotiations to actually bring this agreement to life. The formal signing finally took place in July 2025, but it required a full year of preparations before it officially came into force in July 2026. When negotiations drag on for 4 whole years, it's usually because both sides are fighting tooth and nail over regulatory details. And in this case, pharmaceutical patents were sitting right at the center of the battlefield. Moving right along to Section 2, a boom for drug makers, specifically focusing on pharma export growth.
So India is already an absolute global powerhouse when it comes to medicine. India's current pharmaceutical exports to the UK, which include finished formulations and the active pharmaceutical ingredients that actually make up the drugs, already sit at a staggering $900 million. They have a massive footprint in the UK market, consistently providing high-quality, cost-effective generic drugs.
And that footprint? It's about to get a whole lot bigger. The new trade agreement grants zero-duty access on 56 specific product categories, or tariff lines. With the total elimination of these UK import tariffs, Indian drug makers are perfectly positioned to capture even more market share. And the timing here is absolutely crucial. The UK is intentionally trying to shift its supply chains and reduce its reliance on Chinese imports. So for Indian manufacturers, the door is wide open to step in as the preferred supplier.
As you might expect, corporate leaders are thrilled. Sudarshan Jain from the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance points out that this tariff elimination is a powerful recognition of Indian quality standards on the global stage. For the industry, this translates directly to improved export competitiveness and fresh, highly lucrative opportunities for contract manufacturing partnerships. It's a genuine boom for the business of making medicine.
But if we flip the coin, you hear a completely different tune from those focused on public health. Patient advocacy groups, like the Working Group on Access to Medicines and Treatments, are sounding a loud alarm. They argue that this exact same trade agreement severely undermines crucial legal provisions that were specifically designed to keep life-saving medicines accessible to the public.
Which brings us to Section 3, why patient groups worry, and the clash between monopolies and access. Basically, advocacy groups are terrified this deal protects pharmaceutical monopolies at the direct expense of everyday patients. Their concerns really revolve around a few highly specific legal changes. First, the deal's preference for voluntary licenses over compulsory licenses. And don't worry, we're going to break those terms down in just a second. Second, there's a huge fear that functionally harmonizing the practices of the UK and Indian patent offices could lead to what's known in the industry as evergreening. Evergreening is a controversial tactic where a pharma company makes a minor, sometimes completely superficial, innovation to an existing drug just to extend their patent and block cheaper generics from entering the market. If UK giants get stronger exclusivity over their trial data, those cheaper generics get delayed. And ultimately, the patients pay the price. Let's unpack that licensing jargon in Section 4, the licensing battle explained.
This right here is the absolute core of the issue. Consider a voluntary license. This is just your standard corporate negotiation. The company that owns the patent holds all the cards. They can choose to allow a generic manufacturer to produce the drug, but only on their terms and only if they get paid royalties. On the flip side, you have a compulsory license. This is a powerful government intervention. If a medicine is absolutely essential but way too expensive, the government can literally step in and say to the patent holder,
Look, we don't need your permission. We are authorizing generic production to save lives. So one mechanism protects the corporation's control, while the other protects the public's immediate needs.
In India, this specific government power is locked into Section 90 of the Patent Act. Historically, Indian generic manufacturers have relied on this safeguard during major emergencies. However, during those 4 years of trade negotiations, the UK pushed really hard for stronger patent protections based around those corporate voluntary agreements. The resulting compromise in the FTA explicitly states that a voluntary license is the preferable and optimal route to ensure medicine access. Patient advocates argue that by officially preferring the corporate route, the FTA skirts around the government's power to intervene using Section 90, which effectively dilutes India's intellectual property safeguards.
To put this into a real-world perspective, let's look at a landmark case from 2012. The pharmaceutical giant Bayer held a patent on a vital liver cancer drug, which was valid all the way until 2020. But the drug was incredibly expensive and completely out of reach for many patients in India. So the Indian government invoked Section 90 for the very first time. They granted a compulsory license to MIndTechPharma to manufacture a vastly cheaper generic version, entirely overriding Bayer's patent. This perfectly demonstrates a compulsory license in action, and it's exactly the type of aggressive, life-saving government intervention that patient groups are desperate to preserve and frankly fear they're losing under this new trade deal.
Finally, let's bring it all together in Section 5, Balancing Health and Wealth, the ultimate compromise.
Now, industry negotiators who are actually in the room insist the FTA walks a very balanced line. They point out that the trade chapter explicitly reaffirms TRIPS flexibilities, which are international rules that allow countries to take necessary measures during public health crises. On top of that, they argue there is absolutely no explicit language in the deal that permits patent evergreening. But, the tension is still there. The text officially prefers voluntary, corporate-led mechanisms over government intervention, all while aiming to unlock that massive $60 billion economic boost we talked about. It's a classic compromise where both sides get to claim victory, but also harbor some pretty deep reservations.
At the end of the day, the India-UK trade agreement proves you can eliminate tariffs and create massive financial booms. But when international agreements prioritize harmonizing global markets and protecting intellectual property, we have to ask ourselves, when push comes to shove, who truly pays the price for innovation?